Hey everyone, Lynne and Joseph with Salt Marsh Properties here. We hope you're doing well. We're just bringing you another video in this series that we have for sellers that are just informational for you, hopefully. If you're considering you're selling your home here in the greater Charleston area, we just wanted to give you some info that would help in that process. And today, we're going to cover the topic of the cost of selling. So if you're thinking about selling your home, one of the biggest questions always is how much is it actually going to cost me? And the mistake that we make is not breaking that down on a regular basis, which is what we want to do.
Yeah, and we want to do the opposite of the vague version. We don't want you to, we don't love your resource being only the internet. You want to have someone locally who's actually engaged in the market, and that's what we want to bring the real breakdown that sellers need to understand before they get to the closing table. This is also good for buyers because it's always good. What they say, the right price is the one that the buyers and sellers agree on.
Yeah.
So it's important for buyers to understand a little bit about what's going on with the seller on their side.
Yeah, because normally the question is, well, how much did you get for your house? Or that's, you
Right.
sold for a great price.
So today we're walking through those real costs. There are a lot of them we're going to go over today. Joseph, kick us off.
Yeah, so by the end, the bottom line is we want to help you help calculate the net proceeds. So the first one is kind of one that seems weird for a lot of people, but it's the deed stamps, right? Deed stamps or transfer costs. That shows up in two ways. The first one is the deed stamps, which are recording fees. It's basically your way of saying thank you to the government for filing for you to actually sell your property. And that's actually calculated in a pretty specific way. Why don't you tell us what that looks like?
It is, and it is evidently $1.85 for every $500 of value. That's stuff that I see on that final statement, but I don't know that I've even really broken it down that well. So it's generally paid by the seller unless the contract negotiates it differently between buyer and seller.
Right. 9 times out of 10, it is going to be paid by the seller. So if your house sells, as an example, for $650,000, that number works out to about $2,400 that you would pay in deed stamps. And that's paid, again, there's a lot of these costs that don't happen unless you sell. This is one of those, right? You do not pay that cost unless you actually close on your property. It's paid at the closing.
And sometimes it surprises people because sellers who have done this before don't always remember that South Carolina adds this at closing.
Yeah. It's one of those fees that easily can get missed if you're only looking at the sales price and mortgage payoff.
Yeah.
And especially, for some people it may not seem like a big number, but it is, right?
Yeah, and so we're an attorney state. So we have the attorney's fees and they have closing fees. So it's always handled under the attorney supervision. So that means that sellers should expect some legal and administrative closing charges, and they vary by firm. And you can find that out prior to. I often give my sellers and buyers a couple of options, and then I get those breakdowns so that they can know exactly what's hopefully coming to them. There's also the admin fee, a wire fee, and the payoff processing fee. So all those little fees come in, but we get a ballpark for them.
Yeah, and where it may not be the biggest fee on the settlement statement, a lot of times we're talking a few $100s, $500 sometimes tops. It just depends on the firm. One quick side note, don't base it only on the fees, right? Make sure you pick a firm that you trust. We get that question all the time is what's the cheapest one? That's not the question to ask, right? Like make sure that you're using an attorney that you trust. And it may not always be the same attorney that the buyer uses at closing.
And always, if the transaction's more complicated than file by title, it's going to be a little bit more expensive. That's kind of common sense,
Yeah, absolutely. So the next one are going to be taxes. There's a couple of them that we've kind of balled up in this one: taxes, HOA dues, and prorations. This is actually a bunch of small things that can add up, so it's important that we kind of talk through those here a little bit.
Yeah, so like you said, property tax prorations, HOA dues. Mm-hmm. If it's a condo or an attached property, some regime fees or dues, and any account balances that need to be settled by the date of the closing.
Always keep in mind that whenever these prorations are done, they're basically done on how you own the home. And the day of the closing always belongs to the seller, right? So the seller would pay for all the days up to the closing, and then the buyer, if you're basing it over the year, the buyer would pay for everything else. Now, again, keep in mind, this isn't something you pay until you close. So it's something you want to keep in mind there. You also want to make sure that one of the things, and it's an option, one of the contracts as you're negotiating is any assessments. You can negotiate recently settled assessments or anything that may be on there. And that's something that could be in consideration. That, again, we're not trying to avoid an answer on these, but understand that these actually could be, these are going to be very specific to each one of the associations.
Yeah, I mean, so at the end of the day, there are a bunch of little fees that you're going to just want to know about, but there's a ballpark to it. We can get kind of a figure, and that's that you want to find that out maybe before and say, okay, what is this for and what is this for? And those are fair questions, and we want to get those for you, and that's why the attorney can help, break that down for us.
Absolutely, 100%.
It also ranges depending on the neighborhood, the management company. I think sometimes, like if a buyer just goes to maybe apply with the neighborhood, sometimes they get hit with a fee. So fees are fun, right? They're great. However, it's good just to know what's coming at you, and they are part of the real estate transaction.
Yep. So the next one kind of combined too. One could be a fee that you would pay up front, and one again would be at closing. This would be repair costs or concessions. We'll start with the one that actually we're going to keep most of them that we pay at closing, which are going to be concessions that you would give. And that category really creates some of the biggest swings in what the actual seller keeps on this, and that are the seller concessions that would be negotiated to be paid to the buyer at closing.
Yeah, and this is where the contract matters, who you have negotiating on your behalf matters. A seller might agree to make repairs, offer a credit instead, contribute towards a buyer's closing cost, or make another concession to keep the transaction together. I often say there are two different types of negotiations when you're writing a contract. They're at the beginning, and sometimes when you're moving into the repair period, or sorry, the inspection period. If something comes up, you are able to renegotiate and make everybody happy. We're always looking for a win-win.
Yeah, and this is why two homes could actually sell for the exact same price, but the sellers walk away with very different numbers.
Yeah, one seller may have absolutely no repair requests and no credits at all, and another might have several thousand in repairs, and that happens after inspection. So you just have to be prepared for it.
Yeah. Thing to keep in mind though is about 51% of the sellers of the homes that closed closed by paying seller concessions. And so that's to keep in mind. Now, where that median of that number, just so you know, and again, this doesn't have anything to do with repairs, it could have, is around $10,000. And what's interesting about that is that doesn't really fluctuate too much with price. That 10,000 actually is around the standard. It's a little lower at lower price ranges and a little higher at higher, but it doesn't vary like a percentage or anything along those lines. And again, it's all negotiable, and about half of them though did have to pay that.
And what matters is what happens between contract and closing. And that's where, again, I reiterate, know who's negotiating on your behalf. And when something comes up, that they're working towards a resolution versus bringing the emotion and having that shock factor. It's just you're buying a house, two parties are going to have to work through some things that might come up.
Yeah, absolutely. One more is pre-listing or prep costs. This is not something that people talk a lot about because they really want to hesitate spending a lot of money. And one of the things that we advise to do is either if you do a pre-listing inspection or at least go through the home and do some repairs and do some things to bring it up, because the more you can do ahead of time, the more negotiation ability that you have in that. So you may still have some costs up front that you pay for.
We actually have a video specifically on this that we filmed a couple of months ago. So go to our YouTube channel and find different topics. But you know, making that first great impression so that the pictures match the walkthrough, that may cost you a little bit, but it'll let you stay hold firm with your asking price if the buyer doesn't walk in and think, well, now I have 10 things to do.
Right. Absolutely.
So
and the last line item is going to be commission, right? And that's something that commissions are all negotiable. So we aren't going to give any specific examples here because they will vary depending on how you negotiate it. It's just important to know that there will be commission paid should you decide to hire an agent, and they do charge a commission. So you want to make sure you know what that is. A couple of things to keep in mind on that is whether or not as a seller, you're going to be covering your agent's commission as the listing agent, as well as the buyer's agent's commission. Again, that is your choice. Should you choose to do so, that could save the buyer some of the money there. Should you just choose to cover your agent's commission, which again is totally fine, the buyer would just need to know that before they go into it as they start negotiations. I know that you've run into that.
Yeah. So what I do is, you know, as the buyer's agent of our team, is I like to know what the seller and listing agent have discussed before we walk into any of the houses, so that if my buyer and I have negotiated the commission to a certain number, I can tell them what this door is gonna, how this seller is gonna handle. And then we go to the next house, how this seller is gonna handle that. It's just good to have that out, to have that transparency, to know where the seller has discussed it, been educated on it, and then the buyer and I can understand what that house might present at the bottom line when we get to closing. It's just good to have the discussion.
Yep, 100%. And it's also, there is an option that's on there a lot of people don't think about or talk about, is you could also be waiting to see what the offer looks like on the commission as it relates to the buyer's agent. So again, just make sure you understand all of those. And if you have any questions about that and any of the other line items on this, please don't hesitate to reach out. We'd love to help.
Yeah, that's what we do. We love to get in front of people, talk about the ways to navigate real estate in Charleston. We have a certain way that our team does things, and so we love to answer any of those questions. So follow us on our YouTube channel, our newsletters, and our blogs, and we will look forward to hearing from you.
Have a great day.